So thanks everybody for joining today. Our guest speaker today is Edward Colon from University of Michigan and a member of the perfSONAR collaborative effort. And he is going to be talking about automated installation and configuration using Ansible, which has been a recent effort that the project has been taking on. And he's going to give a status of where that stands right now, as well as a little bit of information about when this is going to start being rolled out for the broader use of the community from the perfSONAR project. So I will turn it over to you, Ed.
Thank you very much. I am Ed Colon from the University of Michigan. This is configuring your perfSONAR infrastructure in an automated fashion via Ansible. And let's see here. So I think this slide pretty much sums up the effort so far. You know, in theory, automation solves everything. In reality, automation, it can become all-consuming, much like this project has. So the status of this project is that it's basically in use at the University of Michigan and a few other places, but it's still evolving and being developed. We have a little bit of maturity under our belt, but I would expect there to be some changes, especially in the next month or two, as a result of the perfSONAR developers meeting in Indiana, excuse me, next month. So I wanted to go over what a full perfSONAR infrastructure looks like. Basically, the workflow for scheduled testing is that perfSONAR admins publish schedules either via PS Web Admin, which has a web interface for creating the schedules, or they create them with a JSON skeleton. They usually start with a JSON skeleton and then add their own variables to it and publish that with a JSON publisher. After that, the schedule gets picked up by test points and toolkits and dashboards so that they know when to run the tests and when to pull for data. The data is sent to an archiver, which has to be pre-configured with the test points and toolkits IP addresses so that it knows to accept data from them. MadDash, the dashboard, also pulls the archiver for the data that gets stored there by the test points and the toolkits. And there's also Nagios plugins. So if you have a third-party system, we have a few different monitoring systems here on campus that want to consume this information. One way to get that out of the Esmond archiver and into some other third-party system would be via the Nagios plugins that perfSONAR publishes. Also, I wanted to say, if anybody has any questions at any point, please go ahead and ask them. So when we provision these components, there's a certain order we want to do it in. We want to provision the archiver first, and then the dashboard. And that way, when we provision our test points and our toolkits, they can register their IP addresses with the archiver. Then when you provision your publishing agents, like the JSON publisher and the web admin, you want to actually alert the test points, the toolkits, and the dashboards about the content that they're publishing. So there's a little bit of interactivity with these scripts. So I'm going to do a quick Ansible overview. Ansible basically runs with playbooks that make use of inventory and roles. There's a variable precedence in Ansible. This gives a good list of what is least to most important. And really the important thing here that we'll be working with today is the inventory and the playbook. They have different groups and they have different variables and YAML files allowed in those directories. So we're going to be setting up some group vars and some host vars perhaps, and we'll definitely be setting up some vars in the host file itself. So the host file, basically, it's a mechanism that leaves some sort of template for you to fill in with your infrastructure. The one that I'm going to use today, the automations understand these different predefined host groups. So we'll be using these host groups to enact these different roles, essentially. So I talked about the group and the host variables. inside our playbook, there will be an inventory group vars, all perfSONAR directory, have perfSONAR specific configuration files that all groups will inherit. And then if you have individual host variables that you need to set up, stuff that's specific only to a certain host, you can do that in the same method. You could say inventory host files, and then the host name could be a directory, and then there could be YAML files inside of that that would be picked up as well. So today we're going to be doing this very simply. We're going to use inventory. It's basically contained inside of the playbook. We're going to download that, and I'll show you how to use that. But one of the nice things about Ansible is that if you have an inventory, you can have multiple playbooks reference it. So before our meeting today, I used a Bootstrap playbook to set up these hosts. I made sure that they were secure. I set up their networking, and I did that outside of the perfSONAR playbook. And what we've discovered on the perfSONAR team, having done this for a few months, is that it seems like everybody's institution has different bootstrapping procedures. There's different security concerns. There's just different ways of managing hosts. So we've limited the scope of the perfSONAR playbook to be just perfSONAR infrastructure. We're not concerning ourselves with user management or anything else on the host other than perfSONAR. So one of the other things we're going to be talking about today is Ansible task delegation. If you are doing a role for say a test point, and you create your test point, at some point during that creation process, you can actually delegate to a completely different host, in this case, the archiver. You can say, hey, archiver, here's my IP address. Make sure I can send you data and that you'll accept it. And because we have Ansible set up to manage both the test point and the archiver, this works. During the test point's role and test point creation, it actually has a directive where the archiver registers its IP address. And I'll show you that later. So we have an Ansible controller. It's basically a managed Dell in our cloud. Nothing special about it, except that it's secure. So when we log into it, we have to use a VPN and two-factor, and it has Ansible installed on it, and has SSH keys. I've already pre-populated SSH keys to our target infrastructure. So we're going to use this Ansible controller to as the center of automation to go and install all of the software across all of our different lab machines today. Our target bootstrapping. So today we have a number of different Dells in my lab, and they all have minimal CentOS installed. Their network is configured, their DNS is configured, and they're secured. And that's all outside the scope of this talk. Everybody who wants to use this playbook is going to have to do some form of this for themselves. And now we're going to get into the actual nitty gritty here. So this is the quick start guide, and I'm going to take the liberty of actually doing some of it right now. So if I go over here, you can see I'm in a directory where I have a few files, but there's one JSON file and a host file, and so there's really nothing here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this command. I'm going to clone that playbook. Now, and I did that out of Git. So now I have, and here I am. So the first thing I'm actually going to want to do is, let's see, I'm going to refer to is to do, to install my requirements. And you do that with Ansible Galaxy. So you just type in this command, and it will go and it will fetch the current role, the current published version of those roles. So it just went out and got all 7 roles for me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a simple shell script that I wrote, and all it does is it takes the default files from those roles and it copies them into variables. So that's all it is right there. It's just a bunch of copy commands that translates in there, translates the role defaults into a variable file that we will then edit. So if you actually see it copied them into, you say ls inventory group vars all perfSONAR, you can see there they all are. There's a config file for the archiver, installer, MadDash, and so forth. So let's see here. Now what I would normally do is I'd edit the host file. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take a look at that. And you can see this is very blank. It's just basically a blank file here. It has a little bit of, at the top, it has all vars. This is a little bit of connection information. So that way, when you're running this, you basically have to become root for these automations to work. So that's defined there. And then all the other infrastructure is left blank. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a diff. Let me see here. And I've pre-created for this a hosts file, and you can see the difference there. The difference is being that I've put in PSDEL 1 through 6 in those different host groups, and I've said that my become method is SU. So I'm going to copy that over now. I'm going to say, I'm going to copy that to my inventory. I'm going to double check to make sure that that's going to do what I expect. And yep, there you go. There's the file. I'm going to do that again. So that's the file now. We have the connection variables. We have the infrastructure defined. And now that we've done that, I'm going to run my first real Ansible command here. And all I've done is I've said to Ansible, I want to run the ping module against all my hosts, and I'm going to give you my root password on the command line here. So I have to type that out. And you can see that once you've got your host populated, you can do a sanity check here and say, yes, I can log into all of my hosts, and I can become root on all my hosts. So you can see that that worked. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some very, very, very minimal configuration. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, I'm going to look at the installer. Now, what I'm going to do this to save time. I'm going to say, we have, so perfSONAR, whenever you install perfSONAR software, you have the option of updating the OS. I'm going to actually set that to false to save us some time because it takes a good deal of time. And this file here also, because this is the installer, shows that you can change which type of release you'd like to get. We have staging and nightly. Generally, people don't play with these options. They generally get set by as defaults and left. But if for some reason you should want to run staging or nightly, this would be the way to do it. So I'm also going to say, I have a mesh I want to publish. I'm going to show how we do that. I'm actually going to uncomment this stuff. I have a mesh that I created beforehand. I'm going to say that it's called demo mesh JSON, and I've basically made an entry here in this array, in this list. So I have a list called perfSONAR PS config publish meshes, and by enabling these remote agents here, what I'm saying is when I publish this mesh, I want you to make MadDash, toolkits, and test points aware of its existence and use PS config so that they can follow this. And if you have the ability to configure archives on those so that you can archive the data that's defined in the mesh as the archivers, go ahead and turn that on too. So that's what those variables mean. All right, and now there was one other thing I was thinking about doing. Oh, yes. Oops. So our test point has the ability to register its IP addresses with the archiver, and I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to make the set not empty. I'm going to say I want all my IPv4 addresses, and I want to send them to the group of PS archives. So I'm going to walk more through these configuration files right now, but right now I'm going to kick this off because the process takes a little bit of time to get through it and show everybody different details on it. So back in my base directory, I'm going to copy that demo mesh file into my files directory. And I think I don't have any, I'm not going to set up any individual host stuff right now. And then I'm just going to run this. I'm going to say Ansible playbook. I want it to ask me for my root password. And I'm going to say perfSONAR YAML. Type in my these machines. So what it's going to, so while it's working here, I'm not going to follow along with this. I'm just going to let it run. Instead, I'm going to flip back to our presentation and we can talk about that. So we basically just did this entire page. That took me what, 5 minutes, maybe 10. I mean, granted, I knew exactly which options I wanted, but you set up the host file and you go through the options in sort of an a la carte fashion, and hopefully it'll save you time over having to do this all manually. So when I did the requirements, I used Ansible Galaxy to download these requirements, and here they are. So we have a role for an archiver, a role for MadDash, testpoints, toolkits, psconfig publishers, and even psconfig web admin. And they all depend on the installer here. So the installer sets up the repositories and downloads bundles. And this is how it's structured. We have different roles and they get inherited. So all of these roles inherit the installer. So they all rely on the installer to set up repositories and download software. The other bit of inheritance is the toolkit inherits everything the test point does, because the toolkit is essentially a web interface slapped on top of the test point. So we have a bit of inheritance there as well. So the installer role here, we can talk about that real quick. It installs base OS updates. You saw that we disabled them earlier for speed. It configures the repos, installs the main software bundle, and it installs any other optional packages that the software bundle defines as necessary. The test point's really the biggest role. I think that it's also the most mature role. There's a lot of different institutions right now, University of Michigan, as well as some parts of JSON, that are using Ansible to manage their test points. So it works just like a test point install bundle on a bare metal OS. You can, we'll walk through the actual config file in a little bit, but you can elect to add optional packages. You can do any of the other things on the right. And then let's see here, the toolkit on top of that, on top of everything in the test point, you can define the user for the web interface on the toolkit. And once you've done that, that becomes enabled and you can log in that way. The archiver, it basically will, so one of the things I'd like to mention is that when you do a bundle install, a lot of people do a central management bundle install with perfSONAR, which includes the archiver, MadDash, and psconfig. We have split them into discrete roles so that you can put each one of these on discrete hardware. So we at the University of Michigan like to run our archiver separate from our dashboard because they both take up a decent amount of resources, and we want to be able to tune the virtual machines they're on accordingly. So the archiver gets its own machine, the dashboard gets its own machine. So yeah, so the MadDash basically sets up MadDash and manages remote meshes and starts the MadDash agent. The JSON publisher, we'll take a look at that in a few minutes. Basically, when you create a JSON mesh by hand, like I did before, you can use this to copy it to the publisher machine and then publish it with psconfig, and then optionally tell test points and dashboards about the existence of that URL. And then finally, psconfig web admin. This is sort of like the newest technology. It's still sort of being developed. Basically, it's a web front end for creating and publishing schedules. And it's done in a Docker environment, and we have a role to set that all up. I'll show you that in a second. So before we go to future development, let's go take a look and see what happened here. And I'm going to scroll back through this, and we'll walk through it. So it did a lot of different stuff. So first it did the installer and the archive. So it basically configured the Esmond archive and brought that up. Then the next thing it did was it moved on and created the MadDash agent on a different machine. It started that. Then it went along and installed the test point on one machine, and it made sure that it skipped all this stuff because we didn't define it, but you can use a template for lookup service registration as well. I'll show you guys that in a few minutes. And then here, so it actually went out and registered itself with the archiver. It said, I am going to register my interface with the archiver, and there it did so. It checked to make sure all the processes are running. And then here we have the test point. So the test point does basically the same thing, minus the web interface. Let's see here. This is the psconfig publisher. You can see that we had that demo mesh. It copied it over, it published it, and then you can see right here, it actually went out to our test points, toolkits, and dashboards and said, hey, I'm going to run psconfig on you and tell you about the existence of this mesh. So there you go, it did that. And then down here, we get down to psconfig web admin, and basically it goes through and it sets up the Docker ecosystem. It gets that all running. So I wanted to show you guys. Oh boy. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to run a command against all of our machines in inventory. And I'm going to say psconfig, oops, remote list. Whoops. Okay, I'm in the wrong directory. That would explain it, wouldn't it? So there we go. I ran this command freehand, And you can see PSDel 6 and 3 do not have don't have psconfig installed on them. They gave an error. But you can see that after running my automation with that demo mesh and the delegation, that PSDel 4, 1, and 2. 1 and 2 are a test point and a toolkit. Number 4 is a dashboard. And you can see that there's pscheduler agents versus the MadDash agents. They all say, hey, look, you know, I've managed to successfully be subscribed to that published mesh. So here I am showing you that. And you didn't, and not at any point did I have to go log on to any of those machines to make that happen. So let's see here. All right, further proof of concept. I wanted to say, so here I am viewing this website. This is PSDel 6, and you can see that I have a psconfig webadmin dash, or I don't have a login to it yet. I haven't configured that, but the hard work of setting up all the Docker containers and configuring it up to this point is done, and here it is. It's running. So let's see here. So so basically, it's about a half an hour into the talk, and we've provisioned a toolkit, a test point, an archiver, a psconfig publisher, PWA, and let me see if there was any. I might have missed something, but basically, we've configured and deployed the entire ecosystem. When I got hired on to do this stuff at U of M, it took us a week to get basically a dozen test points up at one point. So we've managed to drive down the time of configuring and installing this stuff from days to hours to, maybe hopefully an hour or two eventually. So future development. Right now, the test point and the toolkit have good process management. They know what processes should be running and they check for it. None of the other roles do that. We're going to add that to the other roles. Also, PWA is kind of new and it's had some bugs we've been working on. So we need to add some more automation to support that. Basically, we have to add some user management so you can add and delete users off PWA. And then we're also going to do the same trick that we did with the psconfig publisher, where once we publish something with PWA, we're going to use delegation to tell all the test points, toolkits, and dashboards about the existence of those published meshes. Let's see here, MadDash. There's a lot of look and feel options to MadDash. We're going to try to automate some of those. And when I was going through this, our documentation in various places is kind of spotty. So in the future, one of my goals is to clean up the documentation, give it more of a technical look and feel, and have it be a little bit more enhanced. So before I kind of go or take a whole bunch of questions, I wanted just to show, here we are, we're in our Ansible playbook perfSONAR. I want to say I'm gonna go to inventory, group vars. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm gonna go to. I'm just gonna go into inventory. How about that? And you can see in my inventory, I have my hosts, which we've already seen. No surprise there. And we have host vars and group vars. And I also have this other file here called ls registration. So if I show the contents of that file, you can see that we have a number of ls registration variables that we could make use of. So what you could do is, for your test points and toolkits on a per machine basis, you would copy this file into let's see here, into their host vars. So if you'd have a host var directory, you'd have a machine name in that directory that's also a directory, and then you can copy this perfSONAR ls registration daemon file into it and populate it. And when you then run it, with the test points or toolkits. This was skipped over in my run because you can see it's all undefined for me right now. But had this been filled in, it would have populated that in the LS registration file and tried to share that with the LS registration service. So one of the things I'm going to be doing in the future is doing this for all of my machines. Let me see here. So if you go into group vars, all perfSONAR, here is a list of all of my config files. And I'm going to be very pedantic, and I'm going to go through all of them with you right now. So the archiver is pretty simple. We had the mechanism where the test points and the toolkits registered themselves to the archiver. Well, if you're not in control of a test point or a toolkit that you want to add their IP address to the archiver, this is the way you do it. There's an auth list. The auth list has sub-elements. You give it an IP address. You say you either want it or you don't, present or absent, and it arbitrarily needs a user to associate it with it. So we say perfSONAR here. You can see that it defaults to an empty list, but this is the mechanism by which you would manually add different IP addresses that you're not managing via Ansible. The perfSONAR installer, we touched on this very briefly earlier. You can elect to update the OS. You can say which release you want. This is a and the variables at the bottom are set by the other roles. So this is pretty much all this one does. MadDash. So we also had the same problem where we ran psconfig as a delegated task against MadDash. Well, if you don't want to do it that way, if you want to have a static list of your URLs in addition to the stuff that you're delegating, this is the way you do it. You say, here's a list of my remotes. I want them either present or absent, and here's the URL. So you can see right now when it comes out of the box, it defaults to the empty set, but this is where you add that stuff. So the psconfig publisher, we already took a look at this earlier. Basically, you create a mesh file by hand. You tell it on the remote machine where you want to put it. I say /temp because once it's published, I really don't care about it anymore. And then you can elect to alert remote agents. So the other thing I wanted to show real quick here is oops. So in the base directory, there's a directory called files. That's where we stuffed our demo mesh to get published. There's also something in there called skeleton.json. So if we said, so if I do a search for fill, basically this is a skeleton mesh file. When I created my mesh file, I basically went in here and all I did was I replaced these fill addresses with the actual address that I wanted to use. So, I mean, you basically modify this by hand, copy it into that files directory, come into here, tell about its existence, and you're off to the races. You get it published, and you can optionally tell your remote agents, the ones that you have control over. So this is the defaults file for the perfSONAR psconfig web admin. It currently doesn't support the ability to alert remote agents to publish content, but I'm adding that shortly. And here's some other, and this is basically just PWA config paths. I don't really see a whole lot of reason to change these, but they're available in case somebody needs to. Okay, test point. Now, test point is the biggest role of them all. So this is the largest config file by far. You can see that all of the optional packages are included by default. You have the ability to add in NTP servers like the test point does when you do a bundle install. It has to disable root SSH. I had done that previously, but this is an option that's left on by default for security reasons. here is a list of remote remotes. So if you don't have the ability for psconfig, or psconfig publisher or the web admin to come in here and alert you to the existence of meshes, this is the way to do it. You'd say, you know, here's a static mesh. You know, so for instance, some of these are stuff that we don't control, for instance, like central astron pert.edu. You know, we don't control that, but if we want to subscribe to their mesh, we can say, yes, I want this URL and I want the state to be either absent or present. And if you want it to use the archiving ability, you have to say configure archives as set to true. And that's this psconfig remote remotes variable, which is by default an empty set. Down here, you saw me mess with this earlier. If you enable this, you say, I want to make sure that all of my IPv4 addresses get registered with my archivers, and my archivers are all defined in this group, so I'm going to say here they are, and my arbitrary name that I want to associate with these entries are perfSONAR. You can change all these variables right here, or you can enable it or disable it. Let me see here. And then that's it, because down past there is basically stuff that you don't really want to mess with. It's kind of set in stone defined stuff. All right, so the toolkit is basically inherits all of the same things that we just saw with the test point. All of those options occur in the toolkit as well as the addition of the web user and the web password. If I were to set the web password here, it would create the PS admin user, and it would enable it with whatever password I typed in here. And that's it. So this is still it's a pretty complicated set of Ansible scripts with a bunch of different orchestrations, and there's still a few bugs. And Ansible itself is a moving target. I've had things, on the project, we've had things break on us, syntax and porting changes, break some previous Ansible code sometimes. So it's still under development, and there's still, you can expect some minor changes, but it is how it is now is basically gonna stay the way it is in terms of architecture and major feature sets. We're probably just gonna fix a few bugs and add a few extra features, especially for like the ones I talked about earlier, like the PWA management and some of the look and feel stuff with MadDash. So you can see that I went pretty much throughout the entire infrastructure in about an hour or less, and I deployed perfSONAR. So it took me longer to install the OS on all these machines and to set up the SSH keys and all the access than it actually did for me to just go ahead and install perfSONAR just like that. And the other thing is, I think that, like I said before, the test point and the toolkit roles are very mature. So even if on your site you're not interested in managing your archivers or your MadDash dashboards like this yet, you can still deploy a large number of test points and toolkits just using that functionality, just populating those variables in the Ansible host file and using the defaults. So, oh, and then the other thing to make mention of is that all of those group variable declarations, you can override by changing those variable declarations in an individual machine's host file. So host files defeat or win precedence over group variables. So if there's a general consensus for some machines, you can set it in group, and if there's specific reasons to override it, you can override that in the host variables. Let me see here. Let me go back to, and that's it. I mean, maybe I talked too fast, but I didn't know if I'd get through this in an hour, but here we are with some time left.
All right, well, thank you, Ed. And reminder to everybody, use the chat to answer questions, or if you're not going to blast us with too much noise, you can unmute and ask them directly. We already have a question come in from Joe Breen. why Ansible versus the open set that includes Puppet, Chef, Cobbler, Salt, etc.? Was there a specific reason why you went with this product? Simplicity, agentless versus agent, or something else?
No, those are, I mean, that answers the question right there. It's very simple. It's very powerful. It's very extensible. There's people writing stuff for it all the time. It's agentless. I mean, you have the controller, and the controller uses SSH to come over into your target infrastructure just like a user would. All the target infrastructure needs to have Python on there. And as far as I'm aware, all of the supported OSs come with a good enough version of Python that you can SSH in, and then it just works seamlessly. I don't have a ton of experience with Puppet, Chef, or Salt, but I know Salt's more complex. I do know that. But the Ansible stuff is at a great nexus of complexity versus feature set. It so far it's managed to handle pretty much everything we've needed it to do, and the syntax and ability to do it has remained fairly simple. I'd say my major aggravation with Ansible is they work really hard to make sure it's not a programming language. So sometimes things that you'd want to be able to do in a loop or something like that becomes a little bit cumbersome the way that some of their stuff is structured. But generally, it's powerful enough to do everything we wanted it to do, and simple enough that you don't need to have a full-time automation expert to be able to do it. I had interns last year that I had to do a few Ansible projects. I'm going to have interns this year I'm going to have working with Ansible projects. Once you know system administration concepts on your platform of choice, all you have to do is Google that and say, like, Firewall D. I had to look up something Firewall D. I Googled Ansible Firewall D, and it popped up a page that surfaced all the options that I had available to me, and a few examples of how to use it. So it works really well for quickly translating known sysadmin operations into automation. So some of the delegation stuff that we do is a little bit harder to accomplish, but once you figure that out, you can kind of cookie cutter that around everywhere else too.
All right, thank you. If anybody else wants to type in their questions, feel free to do so. I jotted down a couple as well. So right now, what is sort of the breadth of machines that you're looking to deploy on campus with this? How many do you have now, and how many is the target total for this environment?
Well, we've only got we have like less than a dozen test points and toolkits. We have and we have one of everything else. We have, an archiver, publisher, a MadDash dashboard, psconfig web admin. And we're planning on expanding our test point and toolkit footprint exponentially. I mean, we're looking at going from a half a dozen to a dozen devices to 100 devices to eventually 1,000 devices. And the way that we need automation to do this, because we have even though our footprint is going to scale, our effort cannot. We cannot hire on more full-time employees to manage it as it scales. It has to be able to be scaled pretty much in an automated fashion, or if we're going to be able to accomplish it. So Ansible can use, people use it to manage hundreds of machines at a time. Even though that we haven't reached that scale yet, I do envision that that's where we're headed. Are the GitHub scripts you reference image specific or general perfSONAR? That's a great question. Now let me pull up. So you can see here the roles that I downloaded and used today were all from GitHub, perfSONAR's GitHub site. So they're all general perfSONAR roles. I'm not the only one working on them. There's a couple other people that are interested in this stuff, and they add enhancements and bug fixes. And it's all done collaboratively through the perfSONAR consortium. And you can see the playbook here is also from the perfSONAR GitHub site. So everything that I've done here here today is already open source, and it's available right now. You could go, actually here, I'll show you this. I think this is kind of cool. You go here, this is the repository for what I did today. And then right here, I have basically the same quick start instructions, where if you followed these instructions and you edit the files and you typed in the commands, you could do the exact same thing I did if you had stuff already bootstrapped. You could do that in half an hour, and you'd have perfSONAR infrastructure deployed. So is that, I hope that answers the question. If there was any follow-up question to that, I'd be happy to cover that as well. As you expand Ansible to a large number of machines, or machines over slow networks, I'd highly recommend looking at, okay, so someone's giving me some tips. That's great, because I'm having fun with Ansible, but I still got a lot to learn. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'll take a look at that afterwards. And I would assume that based on the way Kevin's talking, he manages a large number of machines via Ansible. So it is doable. How about that?
All right, anybody else have anything else they'd like to add? All right, well, thank you again, Ed. We will make sure that this gets posted to the website. And Joe has one last question there. Are there links from the main perfSONAR website to these? And I don't actually know the answer to that.
So here we are on the main perfSONAR site. This is the perfSONAR GitHub site. So if you in Google typed in perfSONAR Git or GitHub, you'd get directed here. And down in our projects repository, it's not featured at the top here. We're not as cool as pscheduler yet, or psconfig. You know, we haven't gotten to that level of acceptance yet. But here we are. You know, we've got our different roles, and the master one that you're really going to look for is this one here, the Ansible playbook perfSONAR, where once you get this, it's the beginning of the ability to get the rest of them. You just grab this guy. The requirements all have the other roles listed, as you can see here. So when you run Ansible Galaxy, install those requirements, it does it, and you have everything.
All right, that's great. And I think just because I was thinking a slightly different answer than what you answered with, is this also linked off of www.perfSONAR.net?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that this has reached the level where we do that yet. We have this developer meeting coming up. We're going to sort of reach a consensus on how to version this stuff and how to release it in a more in a more supported, stable release version manner. And I imagine that we might do that then. We might release that on www.perfSONAR.net, but I'd certainly like to. But right now, this is the way that it's distributed. It's off of the perfSONAR GitHub page.
Okay. And Andy is on. Andy, you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, Ed actually did a really good job answering that. I was basically just going to say the same, that it's not there yet, but we're just figuring out the kind of exact details, but we will be publicizing it more widely at some point here soon in the future. So we just kind of make sure we're comfortable with everything, which we're getting very close to that point, as you guys can see from the demo today.
Well, I correctly channeled my inner Andy Lake.
All right. Any other questions? Type them in. Thanks again to everybody who was on. We'll make sure that we get this posted, and we'll send out the link to the recording to both the CI engineering list and to the perfSONAR lists. Hopefully everybody has a good weekend, and next week's talk will be another perfSONAR talk from Michael Johnson, and I think that he was going to be talking about something more related to the GUI, but I'd have to go and look. We'll send out an announcement about that. as soon as I get the abstract from him. So thanks everybody, and thanks again, Ed, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Thank you, Jason, for the opportunity.